So while, oh, thanks, whoever did that, I was supposed to do that. So I felt that while it was in a way challenging for all of us, it also kind of threw us all into these large Zoom sessions with people and with not only with SABA North America EC people, but with all the SABA chapter presidents. And it does seem overwhelming when you start getting emails from people who you don't know, you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what their role is. So we felt that let's at least kind of level set and kind of meet each other, give you guys a little bit of some framework of what the SABA ecosystem is like, but also hear from some former presidents who've done that and who've had to navigate some of the same challenges. So, and if nothing, I think this dialogue that'll happen, hopefully will be extremely instructive, and certainly chime in and ask your questions, follow-up questions. But more than anything, if you don't get anything from this, I think it's the fact that now you can put a name to a face and you know that there are resources out there that you can pick up the phone or an email or a text and get some answers. So that's kind of what our goal here is. I've invited here two former SABA chapter presidents, Priya Bhanu and Maithili Bala, and both of them have had very different SABA journeys, but before I go in to introduce them, just to kind of a little bit of the format, we did think of some core themes that we would like to go over. So I have some questions that I'll pose to both of them, but again, we're not sharing, there are no slides here. The idea is that if you have a follow-up question, or if you have another challenge that you're trying to navigate and would like to ask that question, either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll try to be mindful and navigate that. We are recording the session, so what I'm hoping to do is I will send out a handout maybe later in the week or early next week, where I would capture some of the kind of learnings or anything that we discussed heavily. We'll kind of talk about that. One other thing is that the idea is not really to go into a lot of deep dives of, okay, what kind of system do you use? I mean, those are good questions. We do want to talk about some of those deep dives and kind of what's your endorsement policy, what's kind of from A to Z, what's soup to nuts, whatever that is. But those, I think we're going to be tackling, at least this is my wish, that on a bi-monthly basis, I'm going to pose some topics to all the chapter leaders and kind of get a poll of what's top of mind to the majority of them. And then we, on a bi-monthly basis, we'll just have a session very much like this, where we'll do a deep dive on that one topic, or maybe two. So because we just don't have the time to do all of that. So without further ado, let me just introduce you to both of our former presidents. Priya Bhanu is an attorney advisor in the Office of the Legal Advisor at the U.S. Department of State. She was an attorney at Cleary Gottlieb, where she focused on litigation and antitrust, and also a law clerk to Honorable Paul S. Grewal. She received her JD from University of Michigan Law School and her BA from Johns Hopkins. And Priya was on the SABA DC board for 5 years, serving as president in 2021. During her presidency, SABA DC began to transition from all virtual to some in-person programming, culminating with an in-person gala and a banner fundraising year. It also awarded its inaugural racial justice grants to 2 incredible organizations and 5 stellar public interest fellows. They hosted several sessions to sit in community to grieve losses stemming from anti-Asian hate, and also to discuss important issues ranging from the withdrawal from Afghanistan to the changing immigration landscape due to COVID-19. It also had a banner endorsements year and a record number of South Asians nominated to high-level positions in the local and federal governments. Sabha DC continues to emphasize physical and mental health and monthly yoga classes and other wellness programming. And Priya herself is, do you call it a yogi? You're a practitioner of yoga. I always get slammed by my yoga teacher that you don't do yoga, you practice yoga. Is that the idea? Yeah. So
I think that's right. I mean, I am also a teacher, but yes,
yes.
Yogini, I don't know.
Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ask the question to Priya first, because people will forget all the good things that I told them about Priya and then come back to you, Maithili. So Priya, I just want to kind of ask you, could you give us some background of kind of how you came to this presidency, what background you had before that, what kind of pre-planning did you do, kind of what was it all about?
Sure. Thanks, Rashmi. Thanks for putting this together and for getting me and Maithili together to have this conversation. And nice to meet all of you current presidents. I remember well what it was like to be in your seats, and I wish you all a successful year and hope that this is a helpful conversation. So for me, when I joined the Sabha DC board, it was purely for social reasons. I just wanted to know more South Asians and like have friends at Sabha DC events. That was kind of the my initial goal. And as I made some friends on the board, one of my friends, we at Sabha DC, we have a president-elect system. So when you are elected, you're kind of elected for a 3-year term. You spend 1 year as a president-elect, 1 year as a president, and then your 3rd year is immediate past president. And so when I was in my 2nd year on the board, one of my friends was president-elect, and she was like, I want you to be my president-elect. And I was like, nah, it's not really what I'm here for. Like, I'm not so sure, but she was pretty insistent. And so I said, okay. And then unlucky me, it turned into a contested election, which like never happens. I think it had happened one other time in Sabha DC history. And I actually had to campaign and run, and it was a whole deal. But anyway, so needless to say, by the time I became president-elect, I was like really gung-ho because I had worked really hard to get there. But I think it also gave me kind of really good runway to sort of observe my predecessor, the president, and kind of the way that she ran the board. She had the two of us, we had the difficult task of moving into the virtual world. Rashmi knows what that was like too. And that was really challenging. But I think, I don't know, I think every president kind of has a different vision and goal. And one thing that can be hard to do is figure out what you want yours to be. For me, I think what I kind of came away with and was thinking about heading into my president year was, number one of my favorite things of the board had always been the sort of social interaction with my fellow board members, because there's a lot of work that goes into running an organization, and part of what's fun about it is working together. But when we were doing virtual board meetings, I think a lot of our newer board members felt like they didn't really get to know the community as well, didn't feel necessarily as invested. And so one thing that I was very careful to think about going into my president year was, what are the ways to engage board members through the screen? And so it was sort of like very little things. But, we used to have in-person board meetings with like pizza or food, and there was, 10 minutes at the beginning to just chat, get to know each other. So, we did, those crazy icebreakers at the beginning of every single virtual meeting. I would spin people off into groups. And I think one of them was that Ted Lasso question, would you be a panda or a lion? Like things like that, to just kind of, get folks not out of their comfort zone, but just give them an opportunity to get to know each other a little more informally. But I would say, I think the biggest thing that I put in place, and this is something that, Sabha DC is a bigger chapter. So I think, Maithili and I have different strategies because we have very different sized chapters. But our board is 17 people and our membership is, I think it's over 300 people. And so we have a lot of subcommittees on the Sabha DC board. And historically, my experience was that the committees existed and they would ask for volunteers to run them or be on them, but it wasn't a very hands-on process. And so, especially for newer members of the board, it's kind of like, well, how much am I supposed to do? How much is expected? How much do I have time to do? I felt like there was sort of a lot of questions there. So what I did, and I think one thing that having a president-elect kind of helps with, is I already had relationships with people who were on the board, who were coming back. And I sort of felt like I had an in. And so I basically was scheduling phone calls with every single board member in the lead up. So I talked to everybody before we even started in January. I know that we're past that now, but, and I had basically already sketched out and figured out how many people I wanted on each committee and who I thought would be good based on what I knew about their expertise and their interests. But then we had a conversation where I also asked, well, what are you interested in? And I sort of, we kind of came to agreements, negotiated agreements on sort of what folks would handle. And so what ended up happening then is, I think number one, folks felt like they were helping me by being on committees. And so that gave them a little more, I think, buy-in. And I also tried to push the committees to run a little more autonomously so that they were kind of all working together. And then the other thing I did, and this is again great for a chapter that either has a president-elect structure, or even it has like a clear number two, so like a president and a vice president. But like every week I got on the phone with my president-elect and we would sort of just talk through any outstanding issues, and we split the committees up. And so that I was really only focusing on managing half of the committees and he was focusing on managing the other half. And so that kind of meant that all the committees had touch points with us and we were always in talking with each other. But I think I felt a little less stretched than my predecessor had by that kind of division. So I think for me, a lot of it was kind of just getting kind of the management and organizational structure up and running, which was a big lift at the beginning. But then I felt like my committees kind of ran on their own for most of the year. And so that's not to say that it's not a lot of work to be president. It's a lot of work. You guys all know this already. But I think setting some of those structures up in the beginning was pretty instrumental, at least from a process point. And I think I will stop talking there and we'll talk more about substance programming later.
So just kind of as a follow-up, because Priya mentioned this, in terms of, because of the pandemic, we were kind of moved into this virtual world where we started seeing most of our board members on screen. And it's funny because I'm in Connecticut, we used to have only 2 in-person board meetings, the beginning of the year and practically the end of the year. And in between, we just used to have phone calls. So like people would jump on a call every month. After the pandemic, it started being Zoom. So in a way, it actually was a little better than the previous kind of state that we were in. But that's still a reality for at least for chapters like Connecticut, where the state seems small, but it's kind of spread across. We don't have a density of lawyers in one kind of location like a DC or New York. So I don't know what people's experiences, but if you still are doing virtual board meetings, then I think that idea that the Priya that you threw out there about having icebreakers or just kind of building social interaction, because board members are not necessarily, if there are new board members that don't know the older board members, then kind of just to kind of feel more inclusive and included in the I thought that was a great idea. So, and if anybody has any questions on any of these things, just feel free to chime in. So I'm going to move to Maithili and tell you a little bit about Maithili's background. Maithili, she had a very unusual Saba journey. So she's a research attorney for Honorary William S. Datto at the California Courts of Appeal. She joined the court in 2015 from the human rights space after fellowships at the Center for Justice and Accountability in San Francisco and the Center for Human Rights and Development in Colombo. She also worked as a litigation associate at IRL in Manila and Kirkland and Ellis, and received her JD from Yale Law and a BA in economics from University of Chicago. So Maithili joined the Saba San Diego board for the first time in 2022 as a president. That was her kind of first foray, I think, into Saba. So she'll talk about that. But she came in for the specific purpose. She launched the Afghan Outreach Project to help resettled Afghan judges and lawyers find jobs and learn about our courts. With her amazing board, she organized programs on equal pay, language access, and protests in Sri Lanka. And the networking events included a chai chat with the federal magistrate judge, happy hours, and a law student scholarship program. They also, Saba San Diego also had their outdoor gala featuring an Afghan woman judge as its keynote speaker and granted a $5,000 law student scholarship. She remains on the board, and Maithili, I'm going to ask that same question. If you want to tell us kind of really, how did you kind of get roped in to become the president as your first board?
Fair question. Fair question. Our outgoing president, who did such a great job shepherding us through the pandemic, was leaving the board after 2 terms. And I had helped her. I was kind of going through a personal transition myself. I wanted to engage more in the legal community. I wanted to plan talks on human rights issues and substantive issues that I just felt weren't really being addressed by our Women's Bar Association and other organizations. So when Tarina was president, I organized a talk for Saba, and no one wanted to run for president at the end of the year. So really it was her saying, please do this, please. And me saying, isn't this ridiculous to just step in as president when I've never been on the board? But then I had to think about, do I want this? And I realized, yes, I do. And I'm so glad Tarina asked, and it ended up being such a wonderful professional opportunity just to develop in so many ways as a public speaker, but also bring public interest programming to San Diego, including an Afghan outreach project that helped 8 Afghan lawyers, and counting, find jobs. So we're able to punch above our weight, and I think I have a very different experience than Priya in some respects, ramping up, being a part of a small board. So my board last year was 5, and we had a committee structure that Tarina Mund set up, but we had a hard time filling a lot of those committee chairs. So, and that is still a work in progress. This year, Vanitha Jeswal is on the call. She's our Saba San Diego president, and we're working on filling the committee chairs this year. But I basically had a download call or a download meeting with Tarina at my house, and my mom made dosas. And it was kind of the most amazing thing, so that this year when new bar leaders came in, Vanitha and others, my mom again made dosas, and we again did it at my house. So I'm a strong proponent for the dosa transition. You can substitute paratha or whatever you want. And Anant once upon a time took a cooking class at my apartment in law school. So maybe we're continuing this great tradition.
I wish I could say I maintained the skills I learned, but sadly I did not.
I think I taught you how to cut a tomato.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think how we approach ramping up, I had my first board meeting. All of our board meetings were on Zoom. And my first goal was to figure out, what does each member of the board want out of Saba? I'm out there as a human rights lawyer working for a court, and I'm not, representative necessarily of all the lawyers in our community. So I asked each board member, what do you want from your Saba year? What kind of program would you really like to see? And then I really encouraged a collaborative approach where if you want to organize a talk or a program, great, go do it. And having a small board with unfilled committee chairs, it's both good in some respects. It gave us the flexibility to launch an Afghan outreach project, But it's also hard in some respects because everything was on me, the monthly newsletters and the events and the outreach. And being a small board or a small organization, we have about 70, give or take, members that include lawyers and law students. It is important for us as an org to connect with other affinity bar organizations in making endorsements and planning events. And so that took a lot of learning too, of making those connections with other bar leaders and working towards deadlines to write endorsement letters and the like. So I'll stop it there. I'm sure there will be follow-up, but we got ramped up that way.
Okay, thank you, Maithili. So you clearly are bribing your board members with your dosa.
Well, you know, my mom's dosas can achieve world peace. My goodness.
Yeah, no, well, a lot of and this is not from board activity, but culturally, I think South Asians food is a big part of our culture, and anything to get people to kind of feel comfortable and feel when you're kind of fed some really good kind of cuisine, then I think and then it's as at the end of the day, I feel that it's the social interactions where when we talk about inclusive diversity and inclusiveness, and when I would meet with some non-South Asian lawyers when I was working, I would kind of tell them that you kind of have to be a part of the whole kind of culture, and come to kind of events that we have, which have nothing to do with the law. It could be just a cultural experience. But when you meet people in those settings, it just gives them a different dimension. So the same with the law, with our board members and knowing your board. One of the things, and I see Choidi. So Choidi is on she's the vice president of Saba, Connecticut, and she was on the board. She's been on the EC, I think, of Saba, Connecticut. She was my secretary when I was the president. And one of the things that I did early on when we did our kind of first happy hour was do kind of a board trivia. So things that are very unusual about the board members that nobody knows about, but they're still kind of proud to proclaim that they have these kind of these traits or things that have happened to them. It could be just an event. It just adds a different dimension, and people feel, oh, okay, we're certainly here for serious business, but there's also the fun element to it. And I think it adds to, and Choidi, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just echoing what you said, Rashmi. Rashmi also, for Saba, Connecticut, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, was the founding individual for an annual event that we have. That's the Happy Holy Hour, mixing elements of our culture and also networking within the South Asian attorney community and beyond the South Asian attorney community in Connecticut. So those things, mixing culture as well as mixing our profession in one setting, I think brings people together and really creates engagement within the community.
Right. Yeah. And this year, they've taken it one step further. We have all the affinity bars coming to a Bollywood Bhangra dance party, I hear. So
Yep, yeah, and that's a new thing. We've actually heard, I believe the Saba, Dallas or Texas, someone else has done it with great success. So we're trying it out for the first year. We can report back as to how well it goes, but it's creating a buzz and hopefully it goes over well.
yeah. Thank you, Choidi. So so thanks, Maithili. That definitely was an unusual journey, and 5 board members. I mean, that's very courageous, because I can totally see how you must be kind of donning so many different hats. Now, is Saba San Diego planning to kind of Is there, because that kind of takes you to the bylaws. I don't know if you have a slate for more board members or you're being very deliberate about kind of ramping up.
So a few years before I came on, there was a real effort to cut down the board, because a very big and unwieldy board, especially for a membership base like we have, can result in not really getting much done. And so when I joined, I did ask all the past presidents I could get in touch with what they liked out of SABA, what they wanted out of SABA. And for some of the older members, what they wanted was one annual dinner, maybe a happy hour. And so a very large board is probably not necessary to achieve that, and will get in the way of other kinds of programming just to get a quorum if you have to vote. Now, we tried to create committees in order to not parcel things off and not have everything have to have a board vote. But it was actually deliberate to keep the board smaller. And I think that worked well for our size.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been pretty easy to make decisions for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one quick kind of follow up to this is because you kind of have different size boards and you talked about, Priya, you talked about the committees, and so committee, I'll kind of come back to the committees, but how do you drive kind of membership, I mean, or kind of engage the members? I mean, programming is certainly one thing, but and kind of you can give me both of your experiences, is how do you get people interested in the organization, in all the events for the organization, and also wanting to be a part of the board? Because the whole idea is that, I mean, you have to have new people to kind of keep the board going. So how do you drive engagement with members?
I'm happy to take this one first. So I think actually the trajectory for SABA DC, I think it was really, I would say, only in the last maybe 8 or 10 years where we were really doing a lot of events and a lot of high quality events, and we saw our membership go up. I think even just a few years before I joined the board, we had trouble filling board spots. We had trouble finding a president. And so it really did kind of ramp up, I would say, in maybe the last 5 or 7 years. But I think in terms of engagement, there's a few different ways. Some of our committees are structured so that non-board members can participate. So our endorsements committee is one example of that. And we have sort of bylaws that make very clear that there have to be more board members than non-board members on the committee. But because that committee is making recommendations to the full board, and the full board would vote, that was sort of a space where we were able to bring in some folks who are not on the board, which is really useful because our endorsements process is quite rigorous, and that's something we can talk about later. But it was helpful to have folks who were interested in sort of that like kind of political piece, but didn't want to be, a full-blown board member in other ways. So we structured a few committees that way. I think our membership committee was also that way. And I'm another one that I can't remember off the top of my head. Another thing we do in SABA DC, which again is a little bit, I think, related to the fact that we have such a big membership, but we also have sections. So we have committees and we have sections. And so sections are more focused on different types of members. So we have an IP section, we have a government section, we have an in-house council section. I think we have a health section. We had a newly created partners circle, which is for partners in council. And then we also kind of have I think we call it a women's committee, but I think of that more as a section. And then we also created a junior lawyers division. Junior lawyers division. And so the idea there is to kind of create sub-communities within the larger community for folks to kind of engage that way. So we resuscitated the government section right around when I was on the board, and actually right around when I moved into the government. And I think we saw a lot of people come out because like shocker, Saba DC has a lot of government lawyer members, right? And everybody's excited to meet, their counterparts in other agencies because the federal government actually as a whole does not have that many South Asians, I would say. And so I think kind of identifying these like spaces where South Asians exist, but maybe don't know each other, I think that drove some member engagement in those specific pieces and in those specific areas. And then the other thing we did is when we did programming, and Saba DC has now become a very big programming chapter. So I would say on average, I think we were like 70 events a year or something like that. Like it was a lot. But because of that, we sort of tried to, figure out what the right ratio of social event versus professional development versus sort of purely like educational, like developments in the law types of events were. And so we were trying to make sure that we were kind of sprinkling those social events and also sprinkling them like geographically, because DC, we have folks in the suburbs in Maryland and Virginia. We tried to think about maybe sometimes having weekend activities that would be kid friendly. So we did a really cool community service event in Rock Creek Park, which was basically like pulling a lot of weeds and all this stuff, but a bunch of us just getting together on a Saturday morning was super fun. And the classic happy hours, of course, as well. Sometimes we had dinner series where they would be like around topics, but dinner for sort of smaller engagement. And so those are sort of, I guess, different types of things that we tried to think about so that no matter what a member was looking for from us, they kind of had a touch point that would keep them engaged and coming back. I think those are off the top of my head, I would say some of the things that we did.
Amazing. I don't know how you did 70 events a year. That's just absolutely nuts, but amazing. We aimed for probably about 1 or 2 a month, one event a month, and then one co-sponsored event a month. In terms of membership engagement, I think we had different groups of people that were brought into our network in different ways. So for law students, one big goal we had was to increase law student engagement. And we did that in a couple of ways. We participated as volunteer judges on moot court and mock interview programs, and got involved with the student groups that the South Asian student groups that are 3 local law schools. We also had a panel event highlighting our law student scholarship, and that was really successful. We had 2 former scholarship winners present on the panel, describe their career journey since, and it was followed by a mixer where students could connect with seasoned lawyers. And that became a really good way both to get more applications for our scholarship and to bring a lot of law students on board. And same thing with our Chai Chat, a personal emails reaching out to law students, encouraging the ones that I met at some of these other outreach events to come to our Chai Chat with the judge. That really boosted turnout and was good as well. For different groups, I would say for our MCLE program, we had a different audience. They weren't law students, they were more seasoned lawyers. And so it would have been nice to do 1 or 2 more MCLE events, but we managed the one, and we had a substantive talk on Sri Lanka protests. And those, I think, attracted kind of the mid-level professional. They were on Zoom during the lunch hour, kind of easy to go to. We wanted to have an event, and one of our board members, unfortunately, couldn't pull this together for a couple of different reasons. But we wanted to have an event connecting South Asian in-house lawyers with firm lawyers for potential business referral opportunities, and not just the in-house lawyers, but also we've got Qualcomm here in San Diego and other employers with a large South Asian presence. And that would have been a really nice event that I think would have targeted kind of the more senior lawyers at firms who are trying to bring in business. So that's an idea if others are able to do that, that I think would be successful. Engaging with our past presidents was also helpful. We have an advisory board in Saba San Diego, and that's a way to connect with past presidents when it comes time for annual dinner planning. There's just so much. You need all those sponsors, and you need a personal connection to get to the law firm partner to write that $5,000 check. And so having our advisory board of past presidents helped not only helped us for the annual dinner, but also made them feel engaged in our programming and planning. And they brought people, they bought tables for the annual dinner and was a great way to engage. So I think what I would say is think about the different groups that your organization serves and try to sprinkle out different events. One thing to think about is timing. Summer is a really hard time for substantive programs. And so you might do your happy hours in the summer.
Yeah.
Actually, can I just ask you a question on the advisory board? That's a very good idea. It's something Saba DC does not do. We just informally know who the couple before were, and you just blast and hope that somebody emails back. But my question is it comprised of all of the former presidents? Like, is it that you are forever on the advisory board? And so at some point, Saba San Diego will have like 100 people on that board or whatever?
One day. We are only 20 years old, 21 years old. So, and some folks have moved outside of San Diego, but I think there are about 15 or so active members, and there's a chair each year, and they are available. So the current board can contact the chair if we have a question on something, and they'll float it to the advisory board and get back to the board. Any member of the board can reach out to the advisory board for questions. So it's a really good resource. We last year wanted to do just one meeting with the advisory board to guide our board, because we felt we were young guns. We wanted to try it our own way. But for groups that want more guidance or want to know what they're doing, which might have helped us, they can have more interaction.
Right. So Saba Connecticut also has an advisory board, or I think we call it the advisory council, I believe. And so the funny thing is that we are actually, I think I think we're more than 20 years old, but we started really small. It was like maybe 4 or 5 people. So, but I mean, a lot of you may have heard of Asghar Saeed. So he was there, Yaz's dad. He was there right from the beginning, and he also was engaged in Saba North America. And it's been such a great resource because, and it's not that automatically all the presidents become a part of that advisory board, but it just so happens that, as I said, we haven't had one president every year. We've had people doing multiple years. So we have a very critical mass of people who will show up at every Saba Connecticut event. And they're such a great resource. And it doesn't even have to be that you're the president. We have people like Sudha Shetty. She was the dean of the Western New England Law School. Now she's at CUNY. So we have a judge. We have 2 judges on the advisory board. But it's not only that they feel engaged, as you said, as Maithili pointed out, it's their network, and they've kind of risen in their kind of career trajectory. So it kind of just spreads the network, and it keeps people kind of, it's almost like you're kind of a veteran of the organization, and the organization continues to flourish. So I really do think that it's a, if for at least the evolving chapters, it's a great resource to.
And even, I should add, even the boards that don't have an existing advisory board, think about the members of your board and what groups they can effectively serve. We are lucky this year with Saba San Diego. I mean, I'm a past president. I'm hopefully I can be helpful to Vinita and some of the new leaders. But we also are joined by one of Saba San Diego's founders who rejoined the board after 20 years, which is so wonderful. There's probably programming that she can give us advice on that we wouldn't have thought of. And so I'm mid-level. I can maybe think about folks in my bracket, and you know, some of our board members are earlier in their careers. So think about your current board. Who can you target? What programs do you want to create? And it'll naturally flow.
Yeah. So let me just kind of shift gears a little bit to, because so Shelley, you had a question, and I hopefully, tell me if this was answered by what Priya, Shelley had a question about how do you balance between the substantive law-related programming that can really benefit the new members versus social hours that provides an opportunity for everyone to reconnect. Did you, Priya, did you want?
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, well, for me, the way that I sort of looked at it, I tried to look at the calendar of the year in different chunks. So I would look at it sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly, and then sometimes across the entire year. And so for us, and I think it also depends on, you know, what kind of a social event you're talking about. During the pandemic, when we were still doing a lot of virtual events, like we tried to monthly just have a virtual chai chat where if anybody wanted to like come and hang out and chat, could just come and hang out and chat. That's like very low hanging fruit. You only need one Saba board member to open it up, and then whoever comes, right? Very easy. I think in sort of the more in-person times, I think that probably we would have some kind of an in-person social event for our size chapter. I probably would think it's like every other month. And that sort of some of the, and in those off months, I think if the educational event was in person, that actually used to be kind of social too, because you would show up to the event, you'd hear, and then people would hang around and chat afterwards. So I think it also depends on, you know, are we talking virtual or not? But I think we were still weighted, like we weren't doing more social than educational. I think probably in a given month, like if we did 4 events in a month, I would guess that one of them would be social. I think is how we were weighting it. But it also kind of depends on what your membership is looking for. And I think we also try to just pay attention to, I mean, and I credit my president-elect with reminding me about this. Like there are some events that you put on because like everybody is going to come, and that's super exciting. And then there are some events you put on and like 6 people come, but it's a really important issue. And so it's like really important that Saba DC held an event on that thing. And I think it can be a little bit hard to keep that in perspective and to sort of identify where those spaces are. But on occasion, when I would feel like bummed that we didn't get a huge turnout, he was really good at reminding me. But it's so good that Saba DC did this and paid attention to it and, you know, promoted this issue. And so I think programming can be very tough in that way. The other thing I'll say, and Mike Lee, I think mentioned it earlier too, like at least on the Saba DC board, I think we used to say that everyone was supposed to like run 2 events a year or something, but then because of the way that our committees ended up happening, I don't think it quite went in that way, but it definitely is the case that most of the time it's the board members who just come up with an idea, pitch it, and if folks think it sounds good, then we go. And so I'd like to say there's a lot more planning on my end than there was, but actually in reality, I just had a very engaged board that had these great ideas and wanted to make things happen. And so we just found places in the calendar for them to happen. But I do remember March of my year, I think between co-sponsored events and events that we put on ourselves, I don't know, we had like 20 events in 1 month. I don't even know how it happened. It was absolutely bonkers. And that was just because like, I think my board got so excited and then it was just like, whoo, and all this stuff happened in 1 month. And it was very cool. And also I was like, we are not doing that again, guys. Like we are not doing it again. So, but as I said, Saba DC is like kind of event crazy as it turns out. But
We're going to make you the Saba president coach. How to engage your board? So Mythili, did you have any?
No, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
You mentioned bylaws, and it looks like there's a question in the chat
Oh, okay.
about that as well.
Yeah. So this is kind of at a very high level. All of these things like bylaws or procedure, policies and protocols, these are challenges that I think it's almost like for at least the smaller chapter, or I shouldn't even say smaller, but kind of chapters that are just evolving, but that you're kind of, it's the train's left the station, but you still have to kind of do that catch up, and it's not only a nice to have, but when you are faced with the issue, then you have to go back to your bylaws and see if it kind of meets whatever issue you're discussing. I can tell you from our and Jyoti, you can remind me, but we have talked about redoing or revisiting our bylaws in Saba, Connecticut, and it's just because you actually have to have a committee and a few dedicated people to look at that and bring it back to the committee. But it's always the challenge of, okay, you have to run an event, you have to run your gala, you have to kind of start thinking about all those things. And we haven't been successful in revisiting it, but I don't think we have a time frame of that every couple of years, which I do think would be advisable for all chapters. But tell me, Priya and Mythili, how you guys have handled it if you had to deal with it.
We are in the process of bylaw review. We hired an outside law firm last year. We weren't too happy with what we got. And so now I know that Priya went through this process for Saba DC and probably should have started there. And so I'm going to follow up with you, Priya. But more generally, in approaching administrative challenges beyond bylaws, when I came on board, our bank accounts were not set up correctly, and each president just had signer privileges. We had no authorized representative on the account. So all that stuff had to be squared away. Bylaws, we had to hire somebody. We had to figure out if by offering a law student scholarship, were we opening ourselves up to reporting requirements with the California Attorney General for charities. And so these were issues that were pretty unfamiliar to me. And I had to also think about outside of the bank account issue for both bylaws and the charity registration question. I had to keep in mind, and all of our board members did, that although we are lawyers, we are directors and officers of a nonprofit. And so I wanted to separate out whatever ability I have to look into things and figure out the law from my role as a fiduciary for this nonprofit, and get outside advice and discuss that with the board. So that's something to keep in mind. In finding a law firm to look at bylaws, we got a few different bids and ended up picking someone local who hasn't been great. So that's where we are.
So Priya, do you You have a solution for everyone?
I mean, I don't know that I have the best solution ever, but I do agree with my plea that it is sometimes tempting to fall back on, well, I'm a lawyer, so I must know these things. I am not a nonprofit lawyer, and I am not, familiar with, like, we're incorporated in Virginia. I am not familiar with those laws and those types of things. So for our bylaws, I don't think we had overhauled them in a long time. And so we decided to do it. And by what I mean, when I was president-elect, my president decided she wanted to do it. And then she handed the whole job to me, which was fine, but it was tough. And so we also hired a firm, but it was actually, we hired a big firm who took us on pro bono. And so, like my predecessor, Amisha Patel, she was at Deckert, and so she got Deckert to do it pro bono. And so we had an associate and a partner on the case, maybe two associates. I think there were two associates who kind of like popped in and out. And I think, like, overall, it was a good experience. Although I will say I still had to be very hands-on, and we had to go back and forth a lot and ask a lot of questions. And I mean, I will say, right, like, I was at one point a junior associate in a big law firm, right? Like, I know that pro bono is where you get the opportunity to, like, kind of cut your teeth on things, but maybe I did feel like I was doing a lot of shepherding, but also it didn't cost us anything. And at the end of the day, we did get to where we wanted to go. And I think a lot of the drafting they fixed in a way that I don't think that we would have done as much. And we were able to sort of say, well, this is the structure we're trying to set up. How can you get us there from a language perspective? So, I mean, I think to the extent that I mean, that is one resource that boards have is ins at big firms. And often these are the types of things that those firms are happy to do pro bono. So that is a consideration. Of course, it doesn't mean it's always going to be good. So I think it depends, but that is, something to consider depending on the makeup of your board. And I recognize that was in a particular time where it was literally the firm of the president. So I do think, right, that firms also feel a little bit more of an incentive to support SABA when, their associate or partner is leading the organization. But that's definitely something to consider. And then I would say more broadly on sort of SOPs and also the finances and all of that business. I mean, we ended up dumping our accountant and hiring a better one. I mean, there's just such a large range of like services that you can hire. And I think it is really hard to do that because as a fiduciary, you want to make sure that you're making a good decision, but also like our poor treasurer was spending so much time doing this stuff that we were like, well, we could just hire someone who would do the bookkeeping and then that would make it all a lot better. And so, she did, interview a fefew different folks and we found someone who was actually less expensive and did a better job and helped us keep our books in order. But it's very easy to just go with the flow of what was happening before. And that's not necessarily always correct. We also I think we moved all of our accounts to a different bank. Like we did do a lot of that work as well. And so I think especially even in bigger chapters, it's so easy to just be like, I don't want to rock the boat. This stuff seems to kind of creak along. But we actually, me and Amisha, I think we did a lot of things where we're like, we're just going to move it and then the boat will move more smoothly from here on out. And that is something that happened. And so I think probably for organizations, especially when you get around your like 10 or 12 year mark, probably the things you were doing to get off the ground aren't going to work the same way because hopefully you're bigger and more established and you're trying to do more things. And so I agree that kind of refreshing and thinking through things is a good idea. The other thing I tried to do a lot my year, and Amisha did as well, is like get stuff written down. Like it shouldn't be folklore how we get this person to do this thing, or folklore that we recreate every year about how our endorsements process works or how our like fellowship, lawsuit and fellowship program works, or those types of things. So we did try to make an effort to kind of get some sort of SOP like procedures written down, policies written down that we save in our Google Drive that sort of shows like, well, this is what we do. And it doesn't mean that every year has to do it that way. Of course, every year can change them, but at least there's something to start from that says, well, this is how it's been happening. And that has served, I think, very well in sort of passing the torch, especially on boards that might have more turnover, to just have some of that stuff written down from the get-go.
I completely agree with this, to write down some of these procedures. And I remember when Tarina was giving me the download when I took over overdoses, it just seemed like a whirlwind. And so I started typing things into a Word document of, okay, here's the committee structure, here's our engagement with SABA North America, newsletters, here's how it all works. And this ended up becoming some kind of orientation manual. So what I would say for all of you new presidents is everything you have a question about right now, just jot it down, stick it in one dump file of a Word document, and then clean it up later and pass that on to your next president-elect. It'll really help things as you go.
No, I totally echo. And there's one other point that I wanted to make, which we finally did it in Saba, Connecticut. It wasn't during my time, but Nandita, who's now the president, that she's been able to do it, is streamline our email addresses, because that to me is, I was getting all emails to my personal email. And by virtue of that, everything Saba, Connecticut related during my tenure is not, no one is privy to any of those exchanges. So we now have, and I did notice in the chapter info that there are a number of chapters where the presidents still have personal emails. And I know it's a pain to have one more email address to look at, but you can direct it to your personal email. But at least if you have a email for your chapter, that year over year, the president, vice president, whoever president-elect has access to all the emails of that chapter, I think it really would be beneficial from a knowledge transition perspective. So that would be the one thing that I would highly recommend for the new presidents to do. Yeah.
And I would even add to that, I think that's totally right. And I've seen different presidents do it differently. Like some only try to use the president account. That's kind of funny to me, because like that doesn't seem realistic. But at least a good practice I got in was, if someone emailed me to my personal, or if I was starting from my personal, I always copied the Saba president account. So there was always a copy of what was happening in that account. And sometimes I started from that account too, but that way to just try and sweep some stuff in so that it's all in there, because that, I totally agree, Rashmi, so much of it is just in that institution, that it's just in the email.
Yeah, it's in the email and it's in somebody's head, and then you never have access to it. And just one final point, because we're on time here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Prema. One other point about the accountant and a law firm. I mean, that's a great idea, law firm for the bylaws. I don't think we, so Chody, we have a couple of law firms on our board. That would be a good resource. But we did use an accountant for our taxes. So taxes is also an issue where we had to deal with it, and we probably had to go back and we tried to I mean, I think we had to pay some penalties, but we're still kind of getting that 501c6 status, but I think it's almost done. But that's something that you do want to make sure that you are on top of, because you don't want to have to kind of, after 10 years, pay all the penalties for the last decade of your taxes. So if there's anything that you want, if there's a resource that you need, we do have an accountant in Connecticut, and he did tell me that he he basically does a lot of nonprofit taxation. So I'm sure he'll do an initial consult on a complimentary basis, and then you can decide whatever you want to do. So
Our taxes are pretty simple. It's just a postcard with under 50K. I don't know if it's more complicated at some of these bigger chapters, but
yeah,
we just do it ourselves.
Oh, you do? Okay. I don't know what our designation is, but Yeah, so, does anybody have any questions? And I'm sure that there's a lot more that we could have covered, but, any questions from Priya or Maithili, myself? And I see Tara is also on. Tara, did you have any, Tara, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but if you,
I had a quite Wakar Khawaja here from Saba, Georgia. I had one question about, you guys were speaking about emails. We're actually thinking about transitioning to a proper domain, sabageorgia.com. I'm sure I've seen other chapters have done that. Some others are kind of still catching along, but any advice as far as both from a website as well as email addresses, making that transition? I definitely appreciate the earlier comment about keeping everything centralized as much as possible. But I've also noticed how some organizations that handle their communications very well, like Saba Chicago, I've noticed has like president at domain, VP at domain. They even have committee members, I think sometimes with their own domain, and whoever fills those roles ends up, using that as their primary email address. So just any kind of just general guidance or thoughts, anyone that's done it recently, made that transition, would love to hear about it.
well, Choidi, we did that for Connecticut. Did you have any?
Sure, not quite, Walker. What we did in Connecticut is we use Gmail. We don't, we do have a domain name associated, but it wasn't a platform or it didn't have the capability to give each officer their individual email addresses. So what our president did is we went completely Gmail with our Drive, with our email addresses. So it's not exactly what it sounds like Saba Georgia is going towards, but if it's something that is a potential option, I can talk to you more about how we did that.
Sure, I'll follow up with you. I'm open to a lot of ideas. We just kind of made that decision that we need to get away from the @Gmail thing. I think even with sponsorship requests, we notice that sometimes it's hitting people's spam boxes. So I think having a formal domain just kind of makes everything look a little bit more legit as well when we're reaching out, especially with those kind of requests.
Right.
It looks like Sabani, I'm just saying, it looks like Sabani does that, but I am not from Sabani, but maybe someone from Sabani will have info, but maybe Maithili has it because Saba GC still does Gmail. So
Yeah, we still do Gmail, and we had a big issue last year. At the end of the year, they were transitioning our legacy sabasandiego.org and Saba info at sabasandiego.org. That was our Gmail login. They suspended it, saying that they were migrating all the free legacy accounts to paid accounts. And so we got it restored, tracking down who in 2012 started this account, but eventually got our Gmail Drive back and got our account back. One thing we had to think about was whether to create these separate access emails, and it's a monthly fee. I think it's $3 per user per line, and I don't know. We haven't thought through it as a new board. Do you feel like that's worth it?
That's what I think we're thinking that. I think it is, at least for one, maybe a couple of users. $3 a month shouldn't be too big of a deal for the kind of grander scheme of how we can organize a lot of information. Also, like not have our emails hit spam. I think that's super important to us.
So Shelley had a comment on in the chat box about Saba Washington. They had 3 different mailboxes linked to their domain, but they're transitioning back to Gmail because maintaining the 3 inboxes was expensive.
Okay, it's an interesting thought as well. Thank you for this input. Definitely appreciate the brainstorming and the ideas.
And now you kind of know some of the people, so hopefully, yeah, just reach out. And Wakar, are you on the WhatsApp? Sorry,
not.
You're not? Okay, if you would like, I can send you the, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, Tara, did you have anything to offer?
Sure, just a second. Let me just pin myself. Okay. First of all, thanks Rashmi for putting this together. Priya and Maithili, you guys were super. I'm still blown away with 70+ events And it's not just Priya, like literally every year they have a minimum of 52 events. And what's interesting about this is I can't imagine putting on 52 events at all. But I do see that there's multiple events a week. And I just had a question for Priya. How do you like maintain, given that many events, how do you get people there? And I know you said like sometimes we get some disappointing turnout, but getting any turnout seems pretty crazy good. Like even if you have 6 people at it, like the fact is that you have 70 events, and even if 6 people go to all 70, that's probably better than some of us have had at even some in North America events. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think part of it is, I mean, I guess, well, yeah, I'm going to toot the horn of the folks on the board. I think part of it is, I do think a lot of our board members we try to keep a really close finger on the pulse of really like the new things that are coming up that folks are likely to be interested in hearing about, but then also trying to balance that against sort of some of the nuts and bolts things that new attorneys or attorneys generally might be interested in. I think we were also really able, and this was maybe a weird, we all have these silver linings from pandemic times, that we had a lot of opportunity to have these sort of smaller chai chat type settings with our members where we could talk and hear what folks were really interested in doing. And so I think that has given us a lot more insight than when we used to try and send out polls and like questionnaires and nobody would respond to them. But I think the real key is we try to hit like real diversity in all of the different ways you might have an event. So it's, the social bit, or is it the professional development bit? Is it, a subject matter topic bit? Is it in person? Is there a virtual option? And so I think because of that, it just is sort of catering to like, there's probably a few people who are going to be interested in whatever kind of those formulations are. I think that's part of it. And I think probably the other thing is we try to be very intentional with bringing new speakers around and giving new people opportunities to talk to our community. And then what that does is like, if I brought like Maitli onto one of our panels, then like she's going to tell her friends, hey, I'm like speaking on this panel, and then they're going to show up and then they're going to see like, oh, Saba DC does this cool stuff. Like I should see what else they're going to do. And another thing we've been able to do, we've also done a lot of law student engagement. We just made law student memberships free for all law students to try and encourage more engagement from them. And then when we have our fellows every summer, our public interest fellows, we've started featuring them on panels as moderators for subject areas that they're interested in or what they're working in that summer. And so we're also trying to kind of get engagement that way. But like, interestingly, the last 2 years at our gala, like we had a lot of law students at our gala, which is a little bit of a weird thing, but it was also like a good thing because they're really excited to be there. It's public interest focused. Like their friends are the ones that are being featured, as some of the beneficiaries of the gala. And so I think there's also just sort of driving excitement and interest of people and their own networks to pull in that I think also does a lot of getting people to our events. So
that might be why you keep having engaged boards too, because if you keep a pipeline of people in mind.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like I've been able to pull former fellows from our fellowship program onto the board. A bunch of my friends from law school were on my board because I was like, yes, you will be on my board and help me in my president year. And then I don't know, DC is kind of like a network central type of city anyway. So I think we do benefit from that a little bit too.
Yeah.
But even in a smaller city, I think Vinita has jumped off, but I cold emailed her. I said, we're having this event. I don't know your engagement in Saba, but do you want to become more engaged? She did. And then we had a language access event. I said, hey, do you want to write an article about it and submit it to our county bar magazine? And so she did that. And then that led to more and more engagement with Saba. And now she's our president. So I think just personally reach out, ping certain people, and they can do publicity for your events, and then they'll want to get more involved as well.
Wow, great job, guys. I think Rashmi, great idea. I do think that this was super valuable. Hopefully the presidents or president-elects or whoever's on this that are
Mhm.
representing chapters got some benefit. And if you have questions, concerns, go ahead and email Rashmi. We do have domains for Saba North America. Although admittedly, I've never actually gone into the president's email to do the president's email. So people will send me an email and go straight to my work email. So I think I'm like the worst person in terms of using the technology that's supposed to be used. So.
Yeah. So no, thanks so much. I mean, Maithili and Priya, I mean, this is really, I mean, I learned a lot from both of your journeys because, and that's why we kind of wanted to have a chapter that's not, it's not only the evolution, but the density of, you have a critical mass of lawyers in Washington, DC and San Diego, and which Maithili kind of took by storm by kind of coming right on the board as a president and continues to stay there and engage so many people. But hats off to you, 5 people on the board. I mean, that to me is, I mean, you guys were able to achieve so much with just that kind of only speaks to your management style and how you've been able to engage people. And Connecticut is a different kind of ball game because we kind of are very widely spread across, but I think we've also learned kind of our affinity bars. We have a great relationship. I'm sure all of you do with the affinity bars, and we are also kind of really engaged in the local community, legal community. So, and having 4 law schools really helps. So Maithili, we didn't, I mean, I don't know when you graduated from law, you and Anna, but I don't know if you knew about SABAC at that point. So this was really what I do want. Hopefully, we will have some kind of deep dives more as lunch and learns on kind of 1 or 2 specific topics where we'll kind of get really kind of into the details of the mechanics of some of this, because people do have questions, and it'll give an opportunity for other chapters that have already dealt with an issue to come and share their learnings and insights. So thank you so much for spending an hour, 18 minutes with us. I will try to kind of put out a short handout for some of the learnings and insights and give references so that you can reach out to Priya and Maithili if you have any questions, or practically any of us if you have any questions on managing your board and managing the chapter. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
so
Have a good
much.
night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Great.